On this episode of the Neutral Wisdom podcast, Satanic Warlock Robert Shirley discusses professional wrestling and authenticity of character, and is joined by Church of Satan Reverends Robert Leuthold and Jeff Bowling for their input on the topic. You are listening to the Neutral Wisdom podcast, a podcast dedicated to passing on knowledge and experience from a satanic perspective, hosted by Satanic Warlock Robert Shirley.
Greetings and welcome to the Neutral Wisdom Podcast. I'm your host, Satanic Warlock Robert Shirley, and on today's episode, we'll be talking about professional wrestling and authenticity of character. It's a bit of an odd topic, I know, but pro wrestling and Satanism actually share a lot of similarities. I'll be joined later by Church of Satan Reverends Robert Leuthold and Jeff Bowling. Reverend Leuthold is a huge wrestling fan, and I really look forward to what he has to say about it, since he's quite the character in his own right. Bowling, on the other hand, was an actual worker or wrestler a few years back, and will definitely have some insider stories to share. As a kid, I loved pro wrestling. My weekends and the third Thursday of every month were dedicated to it. It was the closest thing I had to religion, Catholicism notwithstanding, and I worshipped at the altar of the American Wrestling Association. All through my elementary years and on into my teens, the hundreds of dollars I spent on wrestling magazines, merchandise, live shows, all money well spent, at least in my opinion at the time. It was the larger-than-life characters which really got to me. I had never experienced an entire arena of people simultaneously leaping to their feet for one man, that man being Hulk Hogan at the time, and the roar of the crowd was literally deafening. I would venture to say that I have been to quieter concerts. The good guys were superheroes, and we loathed the bad guys. We literally bought what they were selling because they were so good at selling it. However, unbeknownst to us, behind the scenes, things are very different. The wrestling business has long gone out of its way to protect its inner workings, also known as kayfabe from the old Carney days. But with the advent of the internet, those inner workings are becoming exposed. Wrestlers, also known as the boys, used to have to maintain their characters at all times in public. Good guys never ate in the same restaurant as bad guys to keep up the believability of the wrestling product and, of course, sell tickets. Nowadays, though, one is able to ascertain the real personality of a wrestler. This means that the wrestler's character has to be more authentic and true to the wrestler's personality. Otherwise, it seems forced and unnatural. Real character has to be authentic and true for anyone for the same reasons. For my own thoughts on this topic, I would like to read an essay titled, "What a Character! Authenticity Equals Success." Professional wrestling. Kind of an odd topic for a satanic essay, but this is a forum for me to discuss how Satanism has impacted my life, so here we are. I have been a pro wrestling fanatic since I was a little kid. Like clockwork, every Saturday of my youth in the 1970s was spent as follows. Bugs Bunny and Tweety show at 5, All-Star Wrestling at 6, then the exact same wrestling show repeated at 1 p.m. on Sundays. These shows were vehicles to advertise for the live events, which took place at my local arena every third Thursday of the month, part of the AWA Territories circuit at the time. I watched with my father, one of the only positive things we ever shared, and my grandfather, who had been watching pro wrestling since he had been a boy. The thing is, Grandpa actually believed that wrestling was a real sport with real outcomes. For what it's worth, kayfabe, which is a term used to protect the wrestling business, was in full force at this time. Good guys never traveled or ate with the bad guys. Wrestlers kept up their personas all times in public, etc. But more on that later. There was nothing better than going to those monthly wrestling cards and seeing all of my larger-than-life heroes in action. I would cheer for the good guys and heartily boo the bad guys for all I was worth. Of course, I always hoped I would see myself on TV during the programs for the next couple weeks, since they always taped some of those arena matches. But for that to happen, I probably shouldn't have been sitting in the nosebleed section in the dark. When I hit my teens, my family self-destructed, as often happens, and I moved from the country to the big city. It just so happened that my beloved wrestling company, the American Wrestling Association, or AWA, been experiencing a bit of a downward turn in business thanks to larger wrestling companies such as Vince McMahon's World Wrestling Federation taking business away from them due to expansion. As such, the AWA TV tapings were being done in a local high school gym not far from my house. What an opportunity! All of my heroes and villains right down the street. So, like any good teenager with no concept of boundaries, my friends and I would show up at the school on the day of the tapings before everybody else arrived just to hang out at the wrestler's entrance door. Of course, when the ring truck showed up, the crew always asked us if we wanted to help with the setup, like any company looking to exploit local kids for free labor, promising us front row seats in return. I worked like a dog. Free front row seats and access to all my favorite wrestlers? I would be an idiot not to do that. This eventually translated into doing the same type of local work for the big arena shows, which were still being held. Plus, I did make it onto TV, and some of those clips are available on YouTube. I suppose that up to this point, you'd be wondering what this has to do with Satanism. I'm getting there. Being part of the unpaid ring crew meant that we also had access to the wrestlers' dressing rooms. And that was where the fantasy of pro wrestling completely dissolved for me, and I realized the actual depth of the show I was watching. The good guys and the bad guys shared the same dressing room. In fact, played cards back there, in addition to consumption of the odd wobbly pop. Afterwards, they would all head to the local bar together, which I suppose that were I a legal aged adult, this would not have been such a shock. But all of this got me to thinking about the characters these guys played on TV. Having gotten to see them off camera, it was interesting to note that the best characters seemed to be an extension of the real person's own personality. For example, Vern Gagne, the owner of the company, had always been the consummate babyface or good guy on TV. He was always the hero looking to defend his title against the dastardly heel of the day. I found Vern Gagne to be one of the nicest people I ever met while I was there. Of course, I didn't have any business dealings with him. Apparently, that's a very different Vern Gagne. Another of the boys, gorgeous Jimmy Garvin, was definitely the same guy on and off camera. Garvin was a heel who had no time for us for sure. Not that I blame him for not wanting to pay attention to a bunch of kids, but I digress. Plus, it didn't help that my buddy was very rude to his valet Precious, but that's another story. If you watch pro wrestling, chances are you've seen the introduction of a character, or a gimmick as they call it, which just felt off. The character felt forced, and the actions and demeanor of the character felt awkward and unnatural. There are many instances where it's been obvious that the wrestling company's creative team just didn't know what to do with somebody, so they gave them different personas to see what would stick. Sometimes the person can make the gimmick work, sometimes they can't. Best characters in pro wrestling, or in anything for that matter, are an extension of one's true personality and self. Many of the people behind wrestling's successful gimmicks have stated that the gimmick is simply themselves, amped up to 20 or some such euphemism. How I'm relating all of this back to Satanism is that we must find our true selves in order to live our best lives. However, we must be authentic in our self assessment and self awareness in order to be true to ourselves. Magister Dr. Robert Johnson's The Satanic Warlock covers this in depth in terms of finding a warlock archetype. You must discover what drives you, determine why you do the things you do, figure out what has interested you from your early childhood, and see how that makes you the person you truly are. This does take time to figure out. When I first started this journey, I thought I wanted to be the devilish gentleman archetype, always dressed to the nines, super sophisticated, always on. After I applied this archetype for a while, I realized that it was, in fact, exhausting. However, the reason I found it exhausting is that it was not an extension of the real me. I had to go back and dig deep to figure out I am not a clothes horse. I actually prefer to read and learn, so no devilish gentleman am I. Enter the archetype of the intellectual, the one who studies and learns. Once I applied that archetype, things came much easier. Because I was being my authentic self, my own lesser magic became stronger. I'm able to more effectively use my environment and parlay this not only into my personal life, but my professional career as well. Robert Shirley is the name I choose for that archetype, that character. It allows me full immersion into that person I want to be. Of course, WRS is a true extension of my in real life persona, literally ramped up. See how that works? Most characters, whether in pro wrestling or in real life, are extensions of a person's true nature and honesty about one's own self. Are you the best you, which you can be, or are you just playing at something you're not? Let's pause here for a break. When we come back, we welcome Church of Satan Reverends Robert Leuthold and Jeff Bowling for more discussion on this topic.
You are listening to the Neutral Wisdom Podcast. For questions, comments, or suggestions, email us at information.neutralwisdom.ca. Devilish Gentleman Enterprises is pleased to announce the release of Neutral Wisdom, Contemplations of a Satanic Warlock. This book, the first publication by author Robert Shirley, provides a detailed exploration of the philosophy, principles, and practices of Satanism from the perspective of a satanic warlock. The author, a member of the Church of Satan and a graduate of the Warlock Academy, outlines his journey to embracing Satanism and offers practical advice on how others can apply these teachings to their own lives. The book also includes personal anecdotes and reflections on the author's experiences with Satanism and the warlock self, aiming to inspire others to explore and embrace their true selves through the lens of satanic philosophy. Overall, it serves as both a guide and a personal manifesto for those interested in the satanic path. Look for this release on Amazon and Kindle. Visit neutralwisdom.ca for more information. Ever forward.
And we are back with the Neutral Wisdom podcast, and it's a really special day on the show since we actually have two guests. I heard our first guest speak on the Devil's Salon podcast, and after I saw some of his social media posts, I knew he'd be a really good person for this topic. You might know him as DJ Hell on Wheels from Radio Free Satan, or as a moderator of one of many Satanism forums on social media. He can also be seen in the new movie Realm of Satan, now playing at a film festival near you. Our second guest needs no introduction, mostly since he's been on the show before. A U.S. Army veteran, former law enforcement officer, and commander of the Infernal Legion. Both reverends in the Church of Satan, Robert Leuthold, Jeff Bowling. Hey, you guys, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, man.
As we were kind of talking before we came on the air, the subject of wrestling and Satanism, it's something interesting to tie together. You know, it was something that I felt really weird about when I first started writing about it. I feel there's an obvious connection there. And I figure who better to talk to than two really ardent fans about pro wrestling. You know, I know both of you are into the sport, and I thought, nope, this is probably the best opportunity I'm going to have. I'm going to leverage a little bit of people I know and start asking some questions. Robert, you've been around for a long time, and most of us are familiar with you. But for those of us who aren't, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself? It's the first time that I've had the chance to chat with you. So, your background, how did you come to be a Satanist, join the organization, things like that?
Well, I've told this story before, but for those that have never heard it before, it'll be new for them. I first found out about actual Satanism versus the Hammer horror movie tripe about age 17. See, back when I was 17, I was in college, and I admittedly spent more time in the campus computer lab than attending classes. And it was about that time that I got into heavy metal, and I had the hearing loss to prove it. But I discovered King Diamond. And what I did back then and what I still do now is when I get into bands, I do a lot of research. I was reading a radio interview transcript with him, and he said, well, I follow what is known as Satanism. And I'm like, wait a minute, it's a real thing? It's not just something on horror movies? I'm like, so about 6 months later, I went to a mall out of state. I was really, really nervous, admittedly, because I was a kid. Some would say I'm still not grown up, but fuck them, you know. So
That's
I was
me. I'm
very.
some.
Jeff
I'm,
is
I'm some
some
people who would
Jeff
say
is
that.
some
Yeah.
people for sure he is.
I might have grown vertically, but I've never grown up. I mean, grown horizontally. There we go. One too
The,
many beers, maybe.
the dream for all of us. None of us ever wants to grow up like Peter Pan over there sitting on the other side of the lens.
Well, I mean, The other reason that I'm in the wheelchair is that I'm well hung. I'll go back to that in a minute. I discovered the Satanic Bible and everything through King Diamond, and my mom had a heart attack when she found the Satanic Bible in my room. She said, "You got 2 weeks, either the book goes or you do." And well, living in the South, I really didn't have much choice. Flash forward to 2012, and I finally had the money to join, and here I am about 12 years later, a member of the priesthood, which I
It's,
never expected.
no, it's been a hell of a journey for you. I remember first starting to see some of your writings and some of your posts when you were a warlock. It's good to see that you've been recognized and elevated up to a more prominent position so you can reach more people.
Well, thank you for that. Usually I'd use self-deprecating sarcasm, but I'm actually gonna try to play it straight for once.
Well, that's not going to last very long, Robert. It's not going to last.
Oh, I know.
And Jeff knows too. Jeff, we don't really need to go into your background all that much, but really happy to have you here because you kind of have a different take on this topic today. So I'm a lifelong fan. And as I wrote in my essay at the top of the show, I kind of had a job as a ring crew growing up. I know that Robert is a huge fan of the sport and you're a fan, but what else have you got to contribute today?
Well, I'm very fortunate to be sitting here with a couple of marks. No, I am a lifelong fan as
He
well.
put me in a submission hole before the show.
I'm a
He's not
dick
going to tell the
too.
real reason he's in the chair, but
Yes,
uh, no,
submission
it's kind of
hole.
fun for the audience because they get to kind of look behind the curtain. I was telling you this before we started the show. Robert and I usually meet up on the phone about once a month and have like a 3 hour long phone conversation, and inevitably, at least an hour of that is spent talking about wrestling.
So you guys
So
are
I,
friends in real life as well.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, digital real life.
Yes.
I haven't made my way down to Louisiana yet, but one of these days we're gonna meet up and have some PBRs.
We haven't met in person yet, but we both know our respective livers are in for it when we do.
Exactly. But yeah, I started. I don't even know how young I was when I first saw professional wrestling, probably like third grade or so, and I fell in love. Instantly fell in love, and it didn't take long because I'm an analytical type person. It didn't take long for me to figure out what was happening, like what they were doing. So I made it at that point, as a young child, I made it my mission to become a professional wrestler. I decided to pursue that by wrestling, like actually joining the wrestling team and joining the theater department. And so for anybody who still keeps kayfabe alive, I just killed it. Because that's what wrestling is. It's a combination of athletics based on actual wrestling and theater. It's Shakespearean theater in the round. And I was enamored with it. And so as I grew up, it never left. Like my passion for it, my love for it, it never left. Around the time I turned 17, I started just attending little indie shows and trying to just do anything they would let me do. So I put a ring together and I connected microphones and I rang a bell. Eventually, kind of got into becoming a referee. Now, mind you, at the same time as when I was joining the army, so I was kind of handcuffed on what I was allowed to do and what I wasn't. So I refereed a lot of matches up in New York. I did a couple of small like matches here and there, and like unlike a lot of guys in the business, I didn't have that trainer, that guy who taught me how to wrestle, but I had a lot of different trainers who taught me little things as I was during my evolution. Eventually, I moved to Las Vegas. This would have been around 2009 ish. Moved to Las Vegas and had the time to dedicate kind of semi fully to professional wrestling. And so I ended up training with a few guys in Vegas, did a few matches, a few televised matches.
Oh, don't go that far. I want to come back to that. You're going to give it all away at the top of the show, and then we're going to have to kick your ass out and have a real
Right.
conversation. Before we go down that road, I want to run back to Robert for a second so that we can mark out a little bit if you don't mind.
Of course,
Uh,
yeah.
Robert, your involvement with the sport. So a lot of your social media posts, you're really into it. You post a lot of stuff about Roddy Piper and just old school wrestling, which I love it. When
Yeah.
did you become a fan and who's your favorite wrestler from those days? And for that matter, who's your favorite wrestler these days? What's your opinion on the current product? I don't really watch the current product because to me it doesn't have the same feel as the old product did. Now I understand that the matches have changed. You know, back in my day, Vern Gagne could beat Nick Bockwinkel with a side suplex, and it is not like that anymore. You know, so
Yeah.
what about you? When did you get into it, and what's your opinion of the product now?
I first got into the product seriously via the Super Nintendo game WWF Royal Rumble. I got the magazine and I first started watching during the new generation, which a lot of people criticize, but that's where I broke into the business. And I was always a fan of the Federation. I never really got into WCW, which I'm sure would have people coming after me with torches and pitchforks. But to me, no matter what you can say about Vince McMahon these days, he knew how to present the product to keep eyes on the product. And that's why I kept keeping up with it.
We didn't even have it where I was growing up. And I remember the first WWF match I ever saw was the Wild Samoans. And up until that point, I'd only seen them in the wrestling magazines, of which I had
Yeah.
spent hundreds and hundreds of dollars on wrestling magazines and reading about wrestling in the South and World Championship Wrestling and just all of these people we never saw. I never saw a Ric Flair match until the advent of cable. So you're right, McMahon knew how to present the product, but what a brilliant businessman as well. Some would say
Yeah.
underhanded and shrewd, but boy, he really took that up and pushed it to a new art form. And McMahon knew how to make stars.
I mean, it's known now, but if WrestleMania 1 hadn't succeeded, we wouldn't have the WWE as we know it today.
You're
It
absolutely
would have
right.
been gone.
And that was combining, as Jeff said, the showmanship, the theater with the athleticism. So even having not been a worker, anybody that would say that that's not a sport, I just would have a really hard time believing it. You know, these guys are taking real bumps and getting real injuries.
Say what you want about Vince McMahon as a person. I mean, we could probably talk for about 2 to 3 hours just about how much of a piece of shit he might be in real life. But, he knew what he was doing and he had the money to push the product forward. Now, I do think currently with Paul Levesque in charge, we're going to see more expansion, more eyes on the product, especially with them going to Netflix.
Levesque has got that head for the business. It seems that McMahon didn't have, you know, as a former worker and as a guy that could work a crowd as a wrestler. He could work a crowd. He could tell a story. And I don't think that McMahon, while McMahon appreciated that ability, he never actually did it. So I think Levesque right now is taking that business in a new direction.
Yeah, I think that Vince just didn't want to change. As much as people might shit on Vince Russo, I mean, who doesn't these days with him taking credit for everything? If not for him, Ed Ferrara, and Vince McMahon as the guardrails, we wouldn't have had the Attitude Era where everything just went to a whole different level.
And Jeff, you now I want to let you keep going. So, where did you come in as one of the boys? Was it Attitude Era? Was it a little bit later than that? Or what era kind of did you come into
Like when I started watching or when I started working?
when you started working?
The latter part of the PG era is when
Okay.
I started working. Yeah. But that, I mean, the eras are all kind of based off of what WWE is doing, as it should be, because WWE is the pinnacle of professional wrestling. And I don't care what anybody says about it, how much they might hate on it. Those guys, that's where you go if you want to make money. You know,
It
that's
is.
where you
Yeah.
go if you want to be a superstar, like a legitimate superstar. And there are other promotions that are coming up, but at that time, there wasn't an AEW, there wasn't WCW, there wasn't TNA was there, but it was on the way down because they let a bunch of old WCW guys come in and ruin it.
Right after they
Um,
hired Russo, interestingly enough.
yeah. um,
They hired Russo and they got Hogan and Bischoff. So
yeah,
They got rid of the six-sided ring, and that was the beginning of
that was the
really
beginning of
bad
the end.
downturn
Yeah.
for them. Exactly.
At that time, because there wasn't a great alternative to WWE, there was the indie scene was on fire. Everyone was flocking to the indie scene. We were some of the biggest crowds I'd ever seen at indie shows. And so it was a great time to step between the ropes and actually start doing something. I found out very quickly that as much as I love the business and as much as I love being physical, the wearing a tiny pair of trunks and bumping all day long wasn't for me. I still do it occasionally. I still
Were you
can
talking
do
about
it.
the trunks or the bumping?
The trunks, I still do the bumps all the
Oh,
time, even though my neck wishes I wouldn't. Um,
there's gonna be a calendar coming out.
oh
You
no.
mark my words. He's
12
gonna
bumps, 12 bumps for the year.
12 bumps of bowling. Yeah, yeah. We'll get to work on it.
Um, but
put it out
I
through the Infernal Legion.
yeah, but I still loved the business and I understood the business. I understood the business aspect of it. So after I went around and worked with some guys around, especially the Southwest region, but also into the Midwest and onto the West Coast a little bit. I had the opportunity to pick up a manager gimmick and I ran with that. I loved doing that because it gave me the ability not only to coach younger guys and help them understand the business in a way that I didn't get the chance to experience when I was their age, but also because it let me have full creative reign over what was happening. And it let me kind of get involved in the booking process. And the booking process is so important. So that led to me starting my own promotion out in Vegas, which I started. It was called Sin City Championship Wrestling. And we ran for about 2 years. It was a great company. It was a great product, and we were just starting to get a deal with a local camera crew who would have like basically paid subscriber type content when a guy with more money than us and better ties like deep in the business came along and offered me a bunch of money to buy the company. And so I said, yeah, by all means, because who starts a business without an exit plan?
Exactly. So, well, since you were an actual worker and step between the ropes, I would love to put you on the spot and ask you to do a little name dropping. Where'd you work? Who did you work? Anybody we would know? And did you work for any promotions that we might have heard of? Because I know you had mentioned that you worked Tyler Black, but I'm not going to say who Tyler Black is known as these days. But
Well,
you
I
did work
didn't.
Tyler Black.
I worked with Tyler Black. But no, Tyler. For those of you who don't know, Tyler Black is now known as Seth Rollins in the WWE. He's probably the number two guy, maybe the number three now that Cody Rhodes is there. But either way, anywhere near the top of that mountain is the king of the business. At the time, he went by Tyler Black, and I worked with him a few times. I managed a wrestler who was working him in a match, so I would get some heat from the crowd during that match. I worked with him behind the scenes in the locker room. Somehow, even though I was only slightly older than him, like only a little bit, really, I still was always seen as the guy in the locker room who people could talk to and ask advice from. And I think that comes because I took the theater part of it very seriously. So I understood the how to work people, how to work a crowd, how to tell a story in the ring and out of the ring. I guess I should put a feather in my cap for saying I gave Seth Rollins some career changing advice at one point.
Any
um,
regrets? Seeing how far he's gone, do you think that Jeff Bowling could have gone all the way like that?
no, I don't. Honestly, I don't, and that's just me being honest with myself. Like
Mhm.
at any given time, there's maybe 200 people signed to WWE. And again, going back to what I said earlier, if you want to be the top of the mountain in professional wrestling, you have to be in WWE. And if you want to be the top of the mountain in WWE, that's an even smaller group of people that can get there. So, as much as I am proud of my own athleticism and my own understanding of the business and whatnot, I don't think I ever would have got a contract there. And I certainly would not have been Stone Cold Steve Austin or The Rock or someone like that. I have a lot of charisma, but I have a limit to my charisma.
Charisma, you're full of it, Jeff. You're definitely full of it. We got
Oh, I'm full of something. That's for
I
sure.
know, I
Robert can
know.
tell you.
Oh yeah.
Throwing the curtains open. So do both of you guys as longtime fans. What do you think of the fact that the curtain's been pulled back on the business? So when I was a little kid, I believe my first of all, my granddad, as I mentioned in my essay, he was watching when Karl Gotch was wrestling. You know, when it was a legitimate sport right after it kind of came out of the carny circuit. And up until the day he died, he still believed that it was real. You know, he didn't think it was a work. He thought it was all real. Had no idea that the promoters were choosing the champions to create the draws to make money. So now these days the curtain's back because of the internet wrestling community, of course. So do you guys, what do you think that the fact that the curtain's been pulled back, and do you think it was better before kayfabe was broken and the illusion was destroyed? You know, Jeff, having seen it firsthand, for me, I saw it firsthand. It was a huge shock for me to see the heels and the baby faces bring theirs together in the back, right? When they go out and try
Yeah.
and rip each other's heads off. So yeah, I'd like to get some feedback from you guys. I'd like to start with Robert. And what do you think of kayfabe being busted wide open these days?
Well, Jeff and I have had this discussion many times over the phone. Kayfabe isn't dead, it just changed. They let us
Exactly.
think we see everything and that we know everything that's going on. And they let us think we're smart enough to the business when we're not.
And what do you think the
And
advantage of that is for them?
better storytelling.
Yeah, yeah, straight on for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I will echo what Robert said because I've held that view for a long time. When I came in, like fully came into the business, it was in a rough transition period. That ruthless aggression was gone. Ruthless aggression era was hard on them as well because they were still trying to figure out how to come out of the attitude era. And then the PG era took over, which I don't know why that's the name for it. They were PG long before that, but whatever. PG era took over, and I don't think there was a time, I think, in that maybe a 5 year period in the late 2000s where kayfabe was dead because the business itself did not know how to deal with the fact that people knew what was going on. But they recovered. They recovered, I would say, probably around, well, CM Punk's infamous pipe bomb promo. I think by now a lot of people know that was a work shoot, right? So it was a work. He was handed a microphone. He was allowed to go out and say whatever he wanted, and he said a lot of things that he was really feeling. So it was both real and kayfabe at the same time. And I think that that was kind of the signifier of a moment where the business as a whole said, "Okay, we got it. We know how to turn them back into marks." From that point on to this day, a lot of people think they're smart to the business. They're as dumb as a box of rocks. They have no idea what's going on behind the scenes because professional wrestling, especially televised professional wrestling, is so good at making them think they see what's happening behind the scenes. Wrestlers using their Twitter accounts to tell stories and using, Facebook pages to tell stories and having interviews on podcasts where they don't use their gimmick name. They think that they're shooting, that they're telling the truth, and they're not. None of them are.
So do you think that the Vince McMahon announcement about good guys and bad guys after the screw job, the Montreal screw job in 97, do you think that was a work designed to kind of push fans in that direction?
I think it was a work to get his ass out of the fire because he was also facing the steroid
Yeah.
scandal at the time.
Also, I think the reason he did that whole interview, that work interview, was due to the MSG curtain call before
Yeah.
Scott Hall and Kevin Nash left. He had to do damage control. This wasn't like back in the 80s when the Iron Sheik and Hacksaw got caught with coke in the car.
What I always found fascinating about the curtain call was that this is pre-internet, and yet I have never seen a VHS tape be copied that many times that quickly and spread around so fast. Like there were people who never got to see the live broadcast of that, who like a week later were watching the curtain call on some dummy VHS tape that they had found.
Well,
The,
except for your copy of Pam and Tommy, right, Jeff?
Right, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, the only other widely bootlegged wrestling incident was the Jim Cornette Dairy Queen incident.
Which is still talked about to this day.
Is oh my goodness. Okay, so Jeff, as a worker, then, if you run into somebody who is a smart or a smart mark,
Yeah.
okay, so now you're a worker, you're one of the boys.
Someone
Can
like
you?
Robert, you mean? No, I'm
What?
kidding.
I wasn't going to go down that road, but if
Hey,
you run
hey,
into,
hey, hey now. I'll clip your fucking ankles with my chisel.
I gotta guard my Achilles around him.
so can you, as a worker, can you tell the difference between a smart and a mark and someone who's really knowledgeable about the inside of the business?
Well, I mean, yeah, so I think at this point, SMARC has become a term. There was a time where like they didn't want wrestlers to use the term mark anymore, which I always thought was stupid. Using Carney was what tied us back into the history of where we came from. And in many ways, it kept us humble about who we were and our place in history. But there was a time where they didn't want us to use the term mark anymore because people had smartened up. They knew what that meant. But I always thought that the term fit, right? The number one way to tell if someone's like a smart mark or just a mark is their reaction to the live show. If a worker gets on the microphone and says something and that person has a legitimate angry or sad or something reaction to it, in that moment, they're being a mark because they're buying into whatever's being sold. That's okay. We're Satanists, right? Suspension of disbelief is one of the core principles of our magical working. And I think that in order to enjoy professional wrestling, you have to suspend your disbelief. That's what makes it work. And it's a beautiful thing when you can do that, even for just 2 hours at a time. But then there's the smart mark who will listen to that. And this is one of the reasons that's kind of a derogatory term in wrestling, because they'll listen to that worker's promo. And instead of having an emotional reaction to it, instead of suspending disbelief and having an emotional reaction to it, they'll start immediately analyzing his delivery of it and kind of booking the territory in their head or out loud on Twitter or whatever.
Yeah.
I find it irritating to interact with those people, but I also find it humorous to watch them because they really think they know something. They really think they're on to something. And part of the fun of professional wrestling or of any of the kind of carnival arts, whether it be magic or the freak show or anything like that, is fooling people when they think they haven't been fooled. So I find I get a lot of enjoyment out of watching the smart marks do their thing. I get zero enjoyment out of interacting with them during a show or something like that.
One of the ultimate smart marks is definitely Dave Meltzer. And it's
Oh
fucking
boy.
Oh yeah. He's the walking epitome of a smart mark. That man is,
Yes.
but he's also the walking epitome of like a tarot card reader. Because if you ever like read his articles where he's telling you about what's going to happen in wrestling, he's basically just doing a horoscope. It's general enough that no matter what happens, people are like, "Oh, Dave Meltzer called it." No, he didn't.
No, we didn't.
No, he didn't.
And then when he's wrong, he says, "Oh, they must have read my newsletter and changed it." No,
Yeah, they changed it last minute. They made a last minute change.
Well, I love the fact that you brought up, how the smart mark reacts or how the true mark reacts.
Yeah,
Because to me, that speaks so much about a powerful lesser magician, right? To be able
absolutely. Yeah.
to take that environment that the magician is in and to manipulate it to elicit a response from somebody who is willing to suspend disbelief. So, like a wrestling match is a perfect arena for lesser magic. When I was a kid, the joke in the back, what's one bottle of hair dye and 10 teeth is the first 5 rows at a wrestling match, right? But that's the era that I came up in.
Yeah.
But given that wrestlers need to be such effective lesser magicians, what do you guys think about the correlation between Satanism and pro wrestling? So let's look into character development, living a role, being true to yourself, right? We're talking a lot in the essay about the character being an extension of oneself and being able to use that to affect lesser magic. Do you guys see a correlation much similar to myself?
So yes, 100%. There's a correlation between lesser magic, and satanic philosophy in general and professional wrestling. A lot of it boils down to. So we talked about the suspension of disbelief, and in that regards, a professional wrestling show could be seen as a greater magic ritual as a whole, and all the different workers, all the different people involved are the kind of priests of that ceremony, and the audience is what they are, and they have to suspend disbelief in order to make the show work because the show doesn't work if you don't cheer for a baby face or boo a heel, But from the lesser magic standpoint, it is incredible what professional wrestlers have to do in order to exercise their lesser magic. I would say probably more so than any lesser magician out there because it is a fully faceted concept for them. Not only do they have to find their gimmick, their character, that character has to be an archetype that pretty much everyone on the planet has some kind of connection to. But it has to be something that comes from within them, or you'll never believe it. So, right there, you're starting with the archetype concept. Then you add to that the little things they do just to appear a certain way. Like, for example, I never understood until I was working actual shows, little things like why do wrestlers wear baby oil, right? Why do they cover themselves in baby oil? So that their muscles and stuff will shine when the lights hit them a certain, and it adds definition to the muscles. Now, who in their right mind as a lesser magician is going to cover themselves in baby oil to walk down the street? Professional wrestlers will because they know what it looks like to the other person. And that's also a little inside information why wrestlers wear so much tape around their hands. It's not like boxers to hit each other. It's so they can grab each other and hold on when they're covered in baby oil. There's little techniques on how you shave your body hair to make definition, to make it look like your abs are more prominent than they are, to make your chest look more prominent than it is. There's a reason why a lot of wrestlers use like spray tan to look a certain way because otherwise they'll look deathly pale on TV. So essentially, what you have is most professional wrestlers are not 6'10" undertakers. Most of them are around 5'10" to about 6'2". They fit somewhere in there. But when they walk out from the curtain, they look larger than life. You believe that you are looking at a walking, living, breathing superhero coming down to the ring, and that he's taller than any of your best friends, and that he could steal your girlfriend, and you want to be him, and all these things because of all the little things that they put into their appearance. And then when they get in the ring, there's a whole nother element of lesser magic that takes over because now they have the idea of what they're going to do for a match and they have to adjust that based on how the crowd is reacting during the match. So for anywhere from 12 to 30 minutes, two guys usually are working each other and doing all this incredible athletic stuff and getting legitimately injured, but always keeping in the back of their head, okay, what is the crowd doing and how do I have to adjust what I'm doing in order to make them react a certain kind? So you spend 20 years in the wrestling business, which is the average, most people spend in their career, and you're going to be an absolute master of understanding humans and how to make them do what you want them to do.
I just have to say, I have to add a caveat to what you said, Jeff. 20 years unless you're Terry Funk.
Yeah, there's always wonderful exceptions to the 20-year rule.
He retired about as many times or even more times than I asked for about 3 years.
Or, right now we have Chris Jericho still going, working every single night almost, and doing concerts on the side after 31 years and 32 years in the business.
That guy is closer to being one of us in terms of what he is and the way he behaves, because
certainly, yeah.
Ever since he was a little kid, he saw what he wanted to be, and then he went and did it. How many people can say that? And not only did he go do it, he had the top in everything that he tried. So you hear him talk now and he says, well, they want me to do a personal appearance. I don't do personal appearances for less than 6 figures. Well, brick, but I guess he's right.
Yeah.
He's earned that. So, and when Robert chimes in too, I'd like to know just for fun, without name dropping, given that professional wrestlers need to be such effective lesser magicians, are there a lot of Satanists in the professional wrestling business that you're aware of? I can think of 2, but you might know more.
There are a lot of people in the professional wrestling business that I know who are either overtly Satanists, but the majority of whom understand, have read, and respect Satanism, but don't necessarily claim it as their own. There are also a lot of Christians in professional wrestling because one of the downsides of always making yourself look a certain way and trying to sway a crowd and doing all that and getting injured time after time after time is substance abuse. One of the number one ways to get out of substance abuse is programs like NA or AA, and they push religion. So there's a lot of born again Christians. And it's a very strange locker room because you'll have a bunch of either overtly or secretive satanic types mixed in with a bunch of Christians, and everyone in there just wants to put on the best show possible and will absolutely do anything to save their brother's life when they go out to the ring, you know. So it's kind of an odd mix, but yeah, there is. Professional. You kind of alluded to it. Professional wrestling is rooted in the carnival, and so is Satanism.
There actually was a card carrying member. He's dead now. Balls Mahoney was a wrestler. He was a member of the church.
I had no idea. Wow. That guy took some sick bumps. I mean,
Yeah. We can't have a professional wrestling podcast and not mention the sinister minister himself,
Yes.
James Mitchell, who is still going strong and cutting amazing promos down in, I believe he's working NWA right now.
yes. Yes.
But yeah, he awesome guy, first and foremost, not to kill his gimmick or anything. He's a great guy, but he's an incredible worker, incredible manager, one of the legendary managers in the business.
You know, it's so funny. I posted a video. Well, John Davis, a good friend of mine, posted a video of two guys in wheelchairs in like a cage match, and he said that Jim should be my hype man if we do something like that. I'm like, shit, I'll get more money than Jake Paul did. But yeah, to answer your question, I have a two-pronged answer to this. And don't worry, I won't go too deep into this first part because everyone's sensitive about it. Politics is a lot like professional wrestling. They're enemies when the cameras are on, and they make deals when the cameras are off, and they're best friends when the cameras are off. People don't like to hear that, Jeff.
Maybe not best friends, but yes.
This is a reminder that the Church of Satan is an apolitical organization. My viewpoints do not reflect on the Church of Satan, its hierarchy, or the high priest and high priestess. You send any and all hate mail to me.
Preferably written on the back of a $20 bill.
Yes.
Well, you've dropped the price of writing hate mail to you, I see.
Yes.
You made me send 100, so that's
Well, I mean, with the way the economy's going, Jeff figured he better drop his price.
No, but just to kind of piggyback that real quick, Robert, that's an excellent point. There's a reason why, the incoming president of the United States is a WWE Hall of Famer. There's a reason why the mayor of Knox County, Tennessee, is one of the most well-known wrestlers of all time. Why the former governor of Minnesota is one of the most well-known pro wrestlers of all time. Why, when a disaster happens in Hawaii, The Rock appears with Oprah to call for money. And it doesn't matter how you feel about these people or what you think about their policies or anything. They learned to do what they are doing right now in a wrestling ring or in a wrestling locker room because it's all about making people react. And politicians, just like professional wrestlers, have to be masters of making people react a certain kind of way.
At this point, like him or hate him, the incoming president is a heel, period. Whether or not he believes what he says, whether or not he means what he says, he's a heel. And he's got people hating him simply for existing.
And, bully for him, bully to him for that. I mean, there's a lot of people that would work their entire career to try and get the heat that Donald Trump gets just by tweeting. So, it's
and he's embracing it wholeheartedly.
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
the thing. I mean, he's digging at us every week now. And no, we're probably not going to become the 51st state. but it doesn't stop him from getting his digs in, right? Especially with the
Right.
political circus gong show we got going up here right now. But it speaks back to the characters. And is he really like that in real life? Or is he playing a character? I don't know. I'm
Yeah, who
not tied
knows?
close enough to it. I want to get to the character thing in a second, Robert. I want to get to the second prong of your answer there.
I don't like the incoming president. I've been open with Jeff about that, but at the same time, I keep my mouth shut because I don't want to stress myself out. I would rather play video games, watch wrestling, or watch horror movies. Shit, the fix is in and we're not in on the fix. If I got 10% of the money that those people got, I'd be set for life.
Much like professional wrestling, there's nobody who's actually smart to the politics business.
Oh, that's true. And once they get there at the top, they fight like hell to stay up there. I do want to get back to that though, the character thing. And let's leave the incoming president aside and we'll focus on wrestling
4%.
because we don't want
Sure.
to lose people. But do you think that the characters in pro wrestling, being an extension of themselves, right? It's important. So I think of guys like John Cena. He is his character, from what I understand. And I'll come to this question later with the favorite wrestlers, but my current wrestler of the day right now is Maxwell Jacob Friedman, because
Oh
that
yeah.
kid can work a crowd and he can get a crowd to love him or hate him in the space of about 30 seconds. But from what I've heard, he's one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet in your life. So he knows what character to play at what time to get the reaction that he wants. But are those characters an extension of him? Does that make the best pro wrestling character or the best character in any situation?
Yes. And we kind of saw this during the era that Robert came into professional wrestling.
The
There was a
new
big
generation
push.
era.
Yeah, there was kind of friction between the old, I guess you could say, comic book style professional wrestling character and the new almost human style of professional wrestler. We saw one give way to the other because it kind of goes back to what we were talking about with kayfabe. The comic book character would only work if you lived in an era where you believed that wrestling was 100% real. And so, much like boxing promoters, these guys had gone to the dark jungles of Africa and found some kind of panther like superhero, or had gone to, the
But
streets of New
enough
York
about
City and found a brawler.
but enough about Kamala and T.L. Hopper and the Brooklyn Brawler.
The garbage men and the hockey
Oh,
players. That's where I was
yeah,
going with that
The
exactly.
too.
Yeah.
What
Goon.
the hell?
That
But,
was the
once,
Goon, if I remember.
Bill Irwin was the goon,
yeah.
absolutely. And Bill Irwin had been a hell of a worker before they stuck him with those stupid shoes.
But once that curtain had kind of been pulled back and people kind of thought they knew what wrestling was, that wasn't going to cut it anymore. You had to have a realistic. That's why the Attitude Era had top stars like The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin. Now, mind you, if you hear any of these guys talk, because they say it better than I think we could analyzing them, Stone Cold Steve Austin is Steve Austin, but just amped to 11. In order for him to portray that gimmick in the ring, it has to be somewhere inside of him because he'd lose character in the middle of a match. You take a hard bump and you feel a bone separate or a joint come out of place or your muscles slip off or something like that. It's real easy to stop being whatever mask you're wearing and start being yourself again. But it's not easy to do that if the mask that you're wearing is already you. It's easy to stay in character that way. And then to tell a story, right now we're witnessing some of the best storytelling in professional wrestling. And I'm specifically talking about Drew McIntyre. That man right now has become a master storyteller. He's probably hitting the highest point of his career to date. And he's doing it by being himself in an interesting way. So much like CM Punk did with the pipe bomb, he's dropping little nuggets of the way he really feels about things. He just did a podcast interview where he stood up and walked off after he said that nobody contacted him to check in on him when he was away from wrestling for a while. Now, I know some of the guys that work with Drew, and I know that's not true, but I know he also felt that way when he first left the WWE. And so he's calling back to that in his own mind and saying, like, hey, the business doesn't matter. It's all about me, right? Well, that's what a heel is supposed to say. People think that he's being real and he's getting ready to retire and whatnot. he's playing a gimmick, but he's doing it perfectly because he's being Drew. I don't think the comic book characters work in this day and age. I don't think that one of the most infamous gimmicks of all time, The Undertaker, would have worked if Mark Calloway wasn't such a big Nick Cave fan. So everyone gives him credit because he took that comic book character and made it such a lasting thing. But he was able to do that because he really is a Texas rancher who likes dark gothic stuff.
He knew when to change his character. He knew when to tweak it.
Yeah.
Of course, the Phantom of the Opera mask was from when Mabel broke his fucking orbital bone, but it was a nice touch. To also answer your question, I have a public persona. I have a way I talk with Jeff. I have a way I talk with you. And then there's the way that I am on social media. And I will explain that. Don't worry. I have, let's say, a bit of a reputation of being a hard ass.
That's
But
putting it mildly.
a lot of that comes from, and Jeff, I know you understand this. I first got my exposure to Satanism at large and also detractors at large from the alt.satanism BBS. And that place was a train wreck. I first started dealing with this when I was 17 years old. I'm 47 years old now. I'm getting too old for this shit. I'm getting tired. Motherfuckers need to get off my lawn. But about playing a character, with rare exceptions, I'll give people peeks behind the curtain. The thing is, when people decide to play up a character too much, especially in the circles that we're in my case, there's a bullseye on my back and there's a bullseye on my chest. I know that. I can handle that. Some people can't. You have to know, for lack of a better term, the arena or the ring that you're stepping into. And you need to know if you can handle it. And people that try too hard, they get seen through. And they eventually end up melting down in spectacular fashion while whining, "Oh, why don't people like me? I'm doing everything the way I'm supposed to. I'm reciting all the quotes. I'm dressing the way we're supposed to dress." And that's how we know you're fake.
That and your screen name has LeVay in it.
Yes.
Or you shave your head and grow a goatee.
Oh
Not
yeah,
mentioning
those
any
guys are the
names. Yeah.
worst.
Yeah, those guys. I don't even get me started on those guys.
Or these people, they think that they have testosterone. I would shake the ring rope, but I don't have any nearby, so I am not the ultimate warrior.
We had a magister on my other show say something very similar, and I found it really interesting because Magister Johnson is big on the find your archetype and
Yeah.
become the archetype, act the archetype, affect the mannerisms, the clothes. And it's sage advice, I think, for anybody that is looking to improve or become a better version of themselves. And this particular magister we had on the show said, but if you try too hard, you're going to look like a fool. And I
Yeah.
thought, wow. And no one had ever really said that before. It was a real light bulb moment, right? And I can think of a few on social media that are literally doing that very thing, trying too hard and then reaching out and saying, what's going on here? I'm not getting any likes. I'm not getting any follows. I'm not getting any. Well, have you tried self assessing? Like, it's a huge thing. And unlike the creative team of any pro wrestling company, we're our own creative team.
Yeah.
We only have ourselves to blame. So I always feel a lot of pain, in the wrestling arena when you see a character that's not getting over through no fault of the person's own. It's a little harder to feel sorry for somebody who's not getting over in their online persona because they're just not doing things right. And so Robert's made a huge revelation here. Is Jeff Bowling a character? other than being a character? Are you is Jeff at home? Do we have to call Sharon in and ask her if you're a character?
She's probably gonna come bursting through this door any moment right now and set my dog off. Well, of course. I mean, there's aspects of me that I present to the world, as do all of us, that may not be, let's say, 100% who I am if you were talking to me on the street or at a bar or something. But much like with professional wrestling, I found that some of the best way to kind of channel myself to be somebody who is looked at with respect when I walk into a room is to embody the strongest parts that are already me. And maybe if the situation calls for it, amp them up to 11, but usually keep them around a 3 or 4. When you run in a lot of different circles, you sometimes might benefit from using a pseudonym because there may be certain things you don't want tied back to the real you. Like I said, I don't want to say too much, but even in doing that, like I use a pen name for some of my writing. Even in doing that, I'm still amping my best parts. I just at the very end slap a different name on it.
If you read any of the articles that I regularly publish, I lay it all out there, and I'm not laying it out as Robert Shirley. I'm laying it out as myself. It's cathartic, but to me, and now I'm not speaking for anybody else who reads it, but to me, there's some heavy shit in there. So I'm unloading a lot of garbage,
Yeah.
but I'm doing it because it's anonymous. I'm doing a show on pseudonyms and names. And my
Yeah.
wife, in fact, Ms. Wiz, has said, well, I use a pseudonym, but why do I use a pseudonym? Well, Ms. Wiz is a character as well. So I guess in a way, we're all kind of being characters.
The
But the
important
power of a name, right? For example, a couple decades ago, it was harder for female authors to sell books. So they would use a man's name as the author name.
Franklin W. Dixon, the author of the Hardy Boys, was a
Right.
woman. Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes it's as simple as that. You know, you're still getting the quote unquote real me, but it might just be under, the name Bob Smith or something. That's not one of my pseudonyms. It's just a name I use quite often.
uh, the thing is, using my real name, I mean, you can Google me and find me. I can afford to go by my real name. I mean, y'all know where I live. If y'all couldn't tell by the way I fucking talk, you know where I live. Some people can't. Some people are in law enforcement. Some people are in, they might be lawyers. They might have a high-end job. So they have to use pseudonyms, and there's nothing wrong with that.
And there are people in countries where saying the wrong thing could land you in prison for the rest of your life. So having a pseudonym
Uh,
is important for that as well.
because I mean, survival is the highest law. See,
Geez, I'm going to have you
as
guys
far
back for the name show. I'm telling you.
Yeah, we've totally shifted topics here. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
yeah. There goes that rabbit hole I knew we were going to fall in.
as
but yeah,
sarcastic.
so as far as being as living your gimmick, it's absolutely important to. I don't think living your gimmick is the important thing. We've seen some wrestlers who have had very bad endings because of doing that, but it's really important that your gimmick is comes from within you, from a legitimate place within you. And if you're not legitimate, the fans know it right away. That's why I don't think that mark is a derogatory term. I think that mark is just a term for the fans who are buying into the show. And those fans are smart. They not smart to the business, maybe, but they're intelligent people. They paid their hard-earned money. They're coming there. And if you're not pulling at their heartstrings just the right way, they'll let you know by saying nothing. And there is nothing worse for a professional wrestler than having their music hit and walking out to crickets.
Sitting on their
It is the
hands. Yeah.
worst feeling in the world. It just deflates your soul.
You know, I'm gonna give you guys an example, and this is from the new generation era. And my friend at the time was like, "You don't realize it's fake?" I'm like, "No, it's not." But I was like 12 or so at the time, so I can be forgiven, I guess. When Lex Luger body slammed Yokozuna on the USS Intrepid on July 4th, I was invested in that.
They did
But
their jobs.
yeah, they did. I feel bad for Rodney Anoa'i though. I mean, he was like 600 or 700 pounds when he died. But then again, the guy ate fried turkey tail dipped in mayonnaise.
I am honestly surprised that he was given Obviously not speaking ill of the man, he's a legend, but I'm surprised he was given the shot he was given with his health issues, considering how well, I think it's pretty well known at this point how hard Vince McMahon always pushed essentially the wrestler archetype on people.
Bodybuilder. Yeah.
Yeah, he wanted a look out of people. He wanted them to present themselves a certain kind of way. And the fact that someone like Yoko could get over when Vince McMahon had a stranglehold on that company the way he did is testament to just how good he was.
I think it's funny that this was the same time Vince was trying the World Bodybuilding
Yeah.
Federation.
Oh, what a disaster that was.
Well, we've managed to shift back to wrestling, which is good. So the last question I have for you guys today, and I'm going to start myself because my show, when it's your show, you guys can go first. My favorite of all time, Nick Bockwinkel. I loved Nick Bockwinkel when I was a kid. I loved to hate him. When I realized what he was doing, I loved him even more. He's by far my favorite. My second favorite, and I'm really fucking old apparently because it was Duck Crusher. I loved Duck Crusher and him and his barmaids and his kegs of beer and his cigars. And these days, who are your favorite wrestlers these days, guys?
Well, I got started, like I said, in the new generation, and I was definitely drawn into the late Scott Hall when he did the Razor Ramon gimmick, and of course, Kevin Nash and Diesel, and The Undertaker. And he is still one of my favorite talents, even though he's retired. Current wrestlers, I would definitely say MJF. CM Punk and Seth Rollins, definitely.
So do you like them for their ability to work or more for their ability to talk?
Both.
And Jeff, your current faves?
Man, such a rich history, right?
Yes.
I'm going to go a little different. One of my favorites of all time is still working, and that's Paul Heyman. I think Paul Heyman is one of the greatest minds in professional wrestling.
Such a head for the business, yes.
Now, mind you, his work looks like hot garbage, but his mind for the business and his ability on the microphone and his facials, his reactions to things are just, I mean, you can't teach that. So he doesn't have to put on trunks and get in the ring
The
to be
simple
the greatest of
fact,
all time.
the simple fact that he went without sleep for what, 72 hours?
Yeah.
Make his eyes look bloodshot for that one promo.
Are you putting Heyman up against Bobby Heenan
Oh
for
yeah,
wrestling?
100%.
Really?
Heyman blows
Wow.
Bobby Heenan out of the water.
Bobby Heenan's my era, started my era, the Weasel. Anyway, I digress. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I do love Bobby Heenan, but Paul Heyman is just, I mean, he's the greatest to ever do it. If you're in the wrestling business and you're not taking notes every time Paul Heyman picks up a microphone, you're already failing. But that's the GOAT. That's the greatest of all time, right? So who is today making the biggest moves? And I answered this question several years ago on a different podcast. I had said at the time it was AJ Styles. Well, AJ Styles' son has kind of said, not that he's not still working, he's still doing great stuff out there, but is he the next big thing? Not anymore. He had his time, he had his belt, he had his era. I think now, obviously, you guys have mentioned MJF. He's definitely someone to keep an eye on. I think that there's a few guys in TNA that are starting to make their moves up to bigger promotions that definitely should be looked at. But I think right now the next biggest best wrestlers in the world are right now bumping in National Guard armories and bingo halls across the United States. And I would encourage everyone who even kind of likes professional wrestling to spend $10 because that's usually what a ticket costs and go catch an indie wrestling show in your local town because those guys are doing incredible work and they're learning. And a lot of these indie promotions now have learned from what WWE did, and their shows are looking better and feeling better. And so you feel like you're in a legitimate professional wrestling hall, which you are, but like it has that feeling now. The guys are working their asses off, putting in some incredible time, both on the microphone and in the ring. and they're doing it all for a hot dog and a handshake. So go check them out, because I guarantee you're going to go down to your local National Guard armory and you're going to see some kid take a bump and you're going to be like, man, Tyler Black is really cool. And in a few years, you're going to be looking at the new Seth Rollins.
Definitely. I love the local shows. My wife and I started going to the local shows again. And what was really great about it is the intimacy of it. And the boys that are working can kind of tell who's who in the crowd. Like
Yeah.
they would know. Like we had people come out. We were sitting in the front row. We had people come out from the back and say, "Can we bump you? Can we take a bump on you? Can you catch us?" That kind of thing.
Right, right.
And then once they knew that we were smart to what was going on, we had a blast, an
Mm,
absolute blast, because we got to interact with all of them on that level, right? Not just as a mark or a fan, but as you felt like you were part of it. And you don't get that when
yeah.
there's a guardrail or a padded wall between you, right? I'm not going to say anything else about padded walls, but
Right.
It would
but
be argued that I might need to be in a padded wall, but all of the best authors are insane to some extent.
and there we go again. He opened the door, didn't he? So no, I'm kidding. I could do this for hours and hours and hours. I would love to engage you guys offline about this too at any other given time. Before we wrap up, though, is there anything that either of you has going on that you'd like our folks to know about? Where can we find you on social media? Where can we poke the bear, Robert? Jeff, if you got anything going on with the Infernal Legion these days, fill us in. Let us know where we can find you.
Yeah, so I say it, and I've said it before, and I'll say it again. If you are a veteran in the Church of Satan, visit infernallegion.net and join the Legion. We are here for you. You can find what we do on all over social media: Facebook, Instagram, X, MeWe. We're all over the place on social media. And we have a monthly podcast on Radio Free Satan, which I just finished recording the next episode yesterday, so that should be
Right
out
on.
soon.
Okay. And we're not going to talk about that 12 months of bowling calendar with you and your wrestling trunks, are we?
No, you gotta, let me get some other guys in it. I have to find guys I trust enough to let me take a bump off.
So Robert and I are on your first call list, is what you're saying. Robert, where can we find you or give you a hard time online, my friend?
Definitely my Facebook profile. I don't mind you putting that in the show notes. I am also the host of Metal Grotto on Radio Free State.
Well, anyway, like I said, I cannot thank either one of you enough. Thank you for coming on here talking wrestling. I would love to do this again. Maybe we can get the third mystery guest that we didn't get this time. Maybe we can get him on with us at the same time. And let's do this again in the next season. What do you say?
Let's
Yeah,
call
absolutely.
let's call
And
it a rematch.
sounds good. Fantastic. Thank you again, gentlemen. And as always, ever forward, hail Satan.
Hail Satan.
Hail Satan.
And that's going to wrap it up for this episode of the Neutral Wisdom Podcast. Thanks to all of you for listening, and a huge thank you to Reverends Robert Leuthold and Jeff Bowling for being here today. Be sure to check them out on their social media and websites. Please drop a like or comment down below. A like and a follow or a subscription go a long way to helping grow this podcast. For questions or comments, you can email me directly at information@neutralwisdom.ca. You can listen to us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and anywhere else you get your podcast. Check me out on Facebook under Robert Shirley, and check out Instagram at neutral_wisdom. And be sure to visit the website at neutralwisdom.ca. And don't forget, Neutral Wisdom, Contemplations of a Satanic Warlock, now available at Amazon.com. Until next time, ever forward.
You have been listening to the Neutral Wisdom Podcast. For more information, email us at information.neutralwisdom.ca, Facebook under Robert Shirley, or Instagram at neutral_wisdom. Also check out our website at neutralwisdom.ca. Program copyrighted 2025. Devilish Gentleman Enterprises.